you once again for taking the time out to participate in this event. My name is Rakesh Ranjan. I'm the founder of SpringMed Health IT Solutions and also a part of the current cohort of the AMPH program at ISB. I hope you found the keynote and the panel one discussion very helpful, just as I did. And I'm sure the momentum is building up to explore the new normal that the healthcare sector is moving towards. And to continue with the momentum, we now move on to panel two, where the panelists talk about the new normal in the backdrop of the pandemic that has impacted everyone across the world. Well, the pandemic should not have happened. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Oh, sorry. So, yeah, I was thinking that the pandemic should not have happened, but the silver lining is that it has fast-paced the innovation process in the healthcare sector through the adoption of efficient processes, technology, digital services, and development of better value chains. Now, having set the context, I now invite the distinguished panelists. So we have with us Mr. Santosh Marathe, the Chief Operating Officer and Unit Head at Apollo Hospitals. So Santosh has been at the forefront during the lockdown period to ensure that the healthcare services are not disrupted at Apollo Hospitals and their services reach the last mile. We would like to hear about his experience in more detail, like what challenges he came across and how were those challenges managed by his team and Santosh himself. Welcome, sir.
Hi.
Next, we have with us Dr. Avinash Nani Vedkar, the Chief Digital Officer and Head Radiologist at Ruby Hall Hospital, Pune. And he's an ISB alum too. It's a pleasure having him here. At Ruby Hall, he led a development initiative of technology-enabled hub and spoke model to minimize disruption to delivery of healthcare services. And he's also a strong proponent of use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to improve the healthcare services delivery and patient outcomes. Welcome, sir. Would love to hear more about your experience.
Thanks.
The next panelist we have with us is Mr. Sandeep Makkar, Managing Director at Johnson & Johnson India, who strongly believes in an Atmanirbhar Bharat and has been a key member of the team that developed the swabs for COVID tests, which has truly made India Atmanirbhar in conducting more than 1 million COVID tests in a day. Welcome, Mr. Makkar. I now welcome Dr. Neeta Sachan, the Vice President for Investments at India Partners. She comes with more than 20 years of experience in healthcare industries and academia. Her expertise lies in medical services, genomics, biotech, and pharmaceuticals. Would love to hear from her what is the direction the medical device industry is taking and what factors are guiding the change. Apart from the panelists, we have two members of our AMPH cohort as well. Dr. Darshan Mehta, he's a partner at Lab Medica, and Dr. Rashi Vajpayee, who is a researcher and assistant scientist at IMS Health. They will moderate the session. So with this, I hand over the floor to Darshan and Rashi. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear and see me. Thank you, Rakesh, very much. We are indeed honored to be here in presence of such distinguished leaders. In India, as we know, more than 60% of healthcare delivery is performed by private health sector. Now, Apollo Hospital, with more than 72 hospitals, which translates to roughly between 8 to 9,000 beds capacity in India, has, of course, a big contribution in playing this part. So let me address the first opening question to Mr. Santosh Marathe. When the pandemic hit us, healthcare delivery and finances at the hospital were disrupted majorly. The government was grappling with policies, and at such time, the hospitals and the doctors were left to treat by their best estimates. So how did you and Apollo tackle this problem?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I think it's a quite situational question and discussion that we are getting into. I think the moment the pandemic began, I think all of us were ill prepared, including the private sector as well as the government authorities were grappling as to how to address this particular issue. Two important takeaways, a couple of important takeaways from the overall pandemic is I think the speed of change and the acceptance of change has definitely accelerated. I think the decision-making abilities have been much faster. We are seeing a lot of flexibility and a lot of unique measures undertaken by the public health authorities also. And in fact, in most of the activities, we have been working very closely with the public health authorities and the local health administrators in terms of taking it forward as a part of this thing. Another important change element that we have seen is that the occupational health of staff for the first time got its deserved attention. So there is a lot of visibility, lot of discussion, lot of initiatives which are undertaken for the safety and safeguarding the safety of the healthcare providers. And as a proud Indian, lastly, I really feel very proudful when all over the world they have started adopting to Namaste, which is the way of greeting people. And the second important contribution what India has made is in terms of multiple recipes that can bring down the immunity. So I think overall India has been on the forefront of the overall activities. Within Apollo, I think 3 to 4 elements which I would like to highlight. I think one of the advantage for Apollo is being the largest private healthcare network provider in the region. Obviously, we had 72 to 75 hospitals which we connected with. So early on, when the pandemic hit us, we started creating huddle system where we used to get into a call almost on a week-on-week, fortnightly basis, where we used to exchange best practices, where we used to understand and standardize clinical pathways, infection control pathways. What we had also evolved during this short period of time was a concept which is known as Red Book. So this Red Book became our Bible in terms of looking at infection control protocols. And one of the challenges you will understand, being a largest quaternary care setup in the region, we had an obligation to handle regular healthcare work. I think parallelly, while COVID was on the forefront, there were a lot of unmet healthcare needs of the citizens that we were obligated to provide. So that was one of the challenge where we wanted to coexist COVID and non-COVID work. And again, because we are always on the forefront, almost all our significant hospitals are either JCI accredited or NABH accredited. So all our infrastructure had that readiness in terms of creating HVAC solutions to convert the rooms into negative pressure rooms, look at cohorted areas, get into separate entries, separate screening protocols, look at aerosol equipments which were already equipped in terms of reducing the redundancy of aerosol while doing procedures. So those kind of things were great. But obviously the foresight that Apollo always had in terms of infrastructure readiness, second important thing is competency readiness. I think we are really proud the kind of work that our healthcare providers have been providing on the front, braving the overall pandemic issues. And one of the challenges as we keep on seeing, I think the mutation of the virus is also undergoing a change. So it's not becoming as predictive as we were in the earlier days. And as we all understand, most of the cases which are presented now are mostly asymptomatic when they get on to presenting. So I think that was one of the greatest strength within the Apollo ecosystem, where we can leverage strengths, standardize protocols within a very short period of time. And those were the kind of activities which really were quite insightful for all of us.
Thank you, sir. Over to Rashi. Sorry, Rashi, if you're on mute, we can't hear you.
Hello. Hello.
Yes,
we can hear you, Rashi.
Yeah. Hi. A very warm good evening to all of you. Thank you all for having coming us and taking out your time. So it was really nice hearing Mr. Marathi. And as Steve Jobs said, that it's not about money always; it's about people you have and how you lead them. So I'm sure you must have had a great experience while leading your organization, which is very good. Moving forward to our next question to Mr. Nanavatkar. Sir, as I know, Ruby Hall Clinic is one of the biggest hospitals in Pune with over 600 beds. So I'm sure you must have also gone through these organizational disruptions Mr. Marathi was talking about. So, and since you're a clinician and also now you're the Chief Digital Officer for Digital Health Transformation for Ruby, what were the digital innovations you can talk about which you brought in, and were they really successful when they were implemented, or there were any failures you faced? Thank you.
Hey everybody, thanks Rashi. I don't want to reiterate what already Santosh has already said. I think every organization has faced the challenges and addressed them. We realized that first thing we needed to do was to overcome the uncertainty of providing care, as well as kind of include the entire workflows into this business of providing the best of healthcare. We realized the best way was to accelerate digitalization, to reach out and continue to keep our head strong. So the first thing we decided was to have something called as care segregation model without building anything different, but just segregating the care. We tried to move or rather transition to a paperless service rather than continue to have the file moving business. We decided to have more and more adoption of the clinical record sections, which would be more electronic. We also made an endeavor to have more chatbots on our website, which would engage more query handling rather than have the phone call and the contact. We decided to partner with banks like Axis and HDFC to create a virtual money opportunity for patients to pay the money to us. We decided to create health wallets for the patients, which they would adapt and keep a record. We used wearables, IoT, and sensors from the young health tech vibrant community, which is almost 160 strong in Pune, to come in and use Ruby as a playground, to use the opportunity to create a contactless service for monitoring our home healthcare practice. So this was something which started from May and went all the way up to October. Now, we realized it is good for a short-term opportunity to be digital. But if you look at the long-term picture, how long this will stay, that is only for a time which will decide, and also for these people who are manufacturing these opportunities in the startup community to leverage this to a larger cohort. So amongst the other things we realized in the clinical community, our doctors started going beyond care provision to research orientation. We had more of pandemic research shift. COVID vaccine trials came up. We decided to also create this cohort of having more data with us. And then we are on the verge of now putting an enterprise EMR where we can capture this and use it for future work. The other thing we engaged with an insurance company to link insurance sector with the data and also look at consumer behavior on their spending as well as on what kind of care they are looking forward from the hospitals. The other important factor we used was to use natural language processing with speech to text beyond just report capturing in imaging and diagnostic, but also in medical rounds and in discharge summary to have more of digital transition. So we realized the patient as well as the community are more willing to go digital. The earlier fear of data theft and confidentiality kind of broke the barriers and there was a wider acceptance. And within our hospital, we could create small islands of digital excellence along with the pandemic, because we also had less work coming in from the acute care scenario. So this was a good time to engage in digital transition. We used blockchain opportunity, which was in-house homegrown with our own IT sector, to capture pharmacy trends on dispensation of generic versus branded, consumption behavior, trend analysis of our inventory, our payout models as to how our vendor management could be better. This made a very good operational expense management. So we didn't feel the financial pinch in the way we went back, and we tried to re-engineer the way we are able to save money in a much better fashion. We also use the blockchain in our finance to look at our account receivables, to look at our vendor spend, the annual maintenance contracts, to see how we can use this opportunity to reduce the expense rather than try to monetize on a COVID business. So I feel this is something which is nothing novel to my institute. I'm sure everyone must be doing it, but I guess I felt this would be the right way to present a business model innovation which would go beyond just providing a good clinical care setting. Thank you.
So just to add to it, so do you think these model innovations were a good success for you?
They are a big success. On the contrary, we have reached a point where this is going to be like a case study for a couple of partners who have participated in this journey for us. And this is something which we want to take forward. And this is something I feel majority of the institutes are going to look forward to, using this in the day-to-day practice.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next question, Darshan, please.
Thank you, Dr. Avinash. This has been a great digital transformation in the hospital sector. As we know, generally the healthcare sector has been quite reluctant adopting new technologies very quickly. But because of the necessity that has been born due to this pandemic, we have seen a lot of new innovations in this sector. So thank you for that. My next question is to Mr. Sandeep Makkar, MD of Johnson & Johnson India. Your experience in the international health industry is quite vast and rich. And we know that you just very recently, before the pandemic started, in early of 2020, you took the position of MD in India. Within the first quarter itself, you were faced with this big crisis, which could, which is a big test for any leader. So can you share with us what were your thoughts around that time, and how did you steer the organization through this turbulent times?
Thank you, Darshan. Thanks for the question. And it was just so inspiring to listen to Santosh and Avinash talk about their experiences. I think there's an echo here on my end. I'll try to go again here, Darshan. Darshan, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, it's clear.
Okay, perfect. So, first of all, thank you to ISB, and it's been just wonderful to listen to my panelists as well, just blending the heart and the science and also the ingenuity and bringing to bear in the service of the nation, particularly during COVID time. So for me, there's so many examples to share. I don't know where to even start here, Darshan, to answer your question, but I'm just going to maybe take an example that focuses us on how we reinvented ourselves, particularly in terms of solving the upskilling issue, that exists in India, which is the inequality in skilled Indian healthcare workers, and how some of the shifting trends were affecting us during this time. So since you're students of business, ISB, we will talk in terms of supply and demand. So in terms of the consequential demand of healthcare, and this is where, Santosh will agree here as well, in saying that India, from a non-communicable disease burden, is just increasing astronomically, right? Almost 40% of your hospital stays and 60% of your deaths are attributed to it. You also have, cancers, cardiovascular conditions increasing. And in this, the healthcare workers are torn between addressing this non-communicable disease burden, which includes diabetes and other conditions, but also treating the communicable diseases like TB. Another thing that's fueling the demand is also schemes like Ayushman Bharat. You have rising expectations in tier 2, tier 3. Also, what had happened during COVID, which came as a surprise to all of us, was that the early stage detection of lung cancer started to happen. So that was also an emerging trend that was increasing the demand right now for surgical intervention as well. So on one hand, you have an increasing demand of healthcare, but on the other hand, we also know in India, there's a very insignificant supply of skilled healthcare workers. And for us, we know from a World Health Organization standpoint that the country's ratio of doctors to people is 0.7 to 1,000. A third of what WHO recommends. You have medical colleges today creating, residents and surgeons, but the variability of care that exists today is higher than ever. And we also know that surgeons that are low skilled have an impact on patient outcomes. So for us, the mission was really around closing the skill gap. And that became even far more prevalent for us during COVID time, because number one, your healthcare workers, more and more patients were seeking care in tier 2, tier 3 cities. Typically, when they come to Chennai or they come to Delhi or Mumbai, that's where these centers were burdened with COVID care. So the surgical care started shifting to tier 2, tier 3. So there was an emergent need for us to train surgeons and healthcare practitioners in these markets that were now not only handling simple procedures, but they were now going to handle intermediate to advanced procedures as well. So that was that gap we were talking about. So for us, really it was that solving that gap that existed within that. And so we spurred in terms of digitizing our profit. And, we had discussed earlier, J&J, has a machinery in education. We have world-class capabilities in education. And still, before COVID, our engagement on the digital front was less than 1%. If I look at all our programs that we ran on training surgeons, they were less than 1% were digital. Most of them were hands-on, high touch. And this is where we pivoted immediately. So in a week after lockdown, we started conducting high quality courses to train surgeons. So since then, we've designed, but the need was you want to have hands-on training, but you want to have more programs. So how do you enable that when you cannot travel? So we started conducting hybrid courses in partnerships with organizations like AO, which are medically guided non-for-profit organizations. We started doing hybrid courses, 5 centers across the world, Darshan. So we had Sydney, we had Melbourne, we had Tokyo, we had Chandigarh, Bangkok. All of these centers were activated at one time, where you brought in people in smaller groups, socially distanced way, doing hands-on sessions, but then connecting simultaneously across the world, learning from each other. And those hybrid courses have been a huge success, and that's going to be a path for us going forward. The other thing is we've used high-intensity programs, high-touch programs, leveraging our digital platforms. We've even introduced artificial intelligence to improve the standardization for residents and fellows. So anytime you're inserting a catheter for ablating the heart in a procedure called surgical ablation, we have introduced an artificial intelligence program that now residents and fellows can learn offline, which scores their performance. So you're not practicing real time on a patient. You can do it offline, and the program takes cues from all the procedures that have been fed into it. So we've used some of these programs as well, and I really believe that going forward, by introducing telementoring, virtual reality, augmented reality, we can make a big difference here, Darshan, in the way we educate our surgeons and really take this forward. And right now, 90% of our programs are digital. And I think the pendulum is going to swing somewhere in between. It's not going to be completely digital, but I think the truth is going to be somewhere in between. But there's a huge need for us to train tier 2 surgeons in India.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really incredible hearing you. And I remember a few words by Peter F., where he said that management is doing things right, but leadership is doing the right things. And you have really proved it by filling the gap of skill differences, the impromptu and quick thinking of implementing this training program, education program, where people were, just going behind vaccinations and healthcare. You thought on the other aspect of healthcare also, and it's really incredible. Thank you so much for your time. So moving on to our next panelist, Mrs. Neeta Saichan. We look here that you have a rich experience in indigenous medical devices and pharmaceuticals. So Ms. Neeta, how would you say that the pandemic disrupt the market for these manufacturers and the supply chain? And what changes did you observe were made to overcome these challenges?
Thanks, Rashi. And then really great hearing other panelists on the panel here. So I wear multiple hats. I was on the industry side working with the medical manufacturing. So this was a company called Cyient, and there were 8 other verticals, and the medical devices was one of the verticals. They were spread across aerospace, defense, to transportation, to medical. So that's the company I was until a month back, and I've moved to the investor side of things. So a really amazing journey to see both sides of the table. And then prior to this, I was in the pharmaceutical and genomic side. So just to give a flavor about the previous organization, because it was in the medical devices industry, which is similar to what Mr. Sandeep is in. So just to set a context that, he's on the MNC side and we were from the indigenous medical device manufacturing. So some of the top companies that Cyient worked was GE, Philips, Siemens, and likes of those. So a lot of the supply chain, especially for the manufacturing, was from China, which was pretty obvious that, which was very disrupted. So some of the top devices that Cyient was manufacturing, there was a huge lag in terms of addressing that need because of disrupted supply chain. We had to find alternative supply chains from Taiwan or Singapore or Hong Kong. So that took a while, and as well as the cost escalation happened. So this is a huge opportunity for India as well as some of the other emerging economy to be centers of the supply chain. And then I think our previous panel where Mr. Jayesh Ranjan and some of the esteemed panelists also indicated that we need to have the local supply chains for our pharmaceutical industry, which is the API providers as well. So that's a huge opportunity, as well as the whole Atmanirbhar that we need to build towards. So that was one. And then so going back to Cyient Medical, where, we were working with some of the top players. Now, the work over there became minuscule over time, but one of the indigenous startups that we were working with, MolBio, if you've heard of TrueNat, they work in the TB space. And they became our biggest revenue generator during the pandemic time. So quickly, what we saw was that some of the startups stepped up to the plate during pandemic. They brought about these indigenous diagnostic devices or diagnostics kits, which we have never worked with. So this was really heartening to see that the scientists stepped up to the plate, and as well as MolBio. In fact, that was the only RT-PCR machine in the country which was built indigenously. The Roche RT-PCR machine, which cost a couple of crores, it was still in a backlog in terms of providing to the rest of the world. So this is where the opportunity for the students of your healthcare program can really come and step up to the plate to build some of these startups, or be it indigenous devices or diagnostic kits. And then going back to the investor side, where I am right now, again, I think a lot of the investors are looking towards the indigenous startups here in India to work towards making some of these devices, be it digital platforms with our National Digital Health Mission, what Avinash also mentioned, how his hospital and Mr. Santosh from Apollo also mentioned that a lot of the digital platforms have come up. So this is where, I think, all of us together can make a difference in terms of addressing digital needs as well as the local medical devices and pharmaceutical needs. Yeah, thanks, Rashi.
Yeah, Nita, adding to it, do you think that these manufacturers will be able to keep up to the standards and the quality we are looking towards in the near future? And will they be able to sustain the demand for India?
So it would take time, Rashi. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, so as Cyient, they were already doing the 13485 standards, which is the global standards for manufacturing. So many of these players would come up. There are the local Flextronics or Sanmina, but these are the MNCs which are set up base. And then if you see in the ecosystem, there's a lot of spillover which happens. So if you see the iPhone manufacturing is going to happen pretty soon, or the startups of the world, which are, now setting up the medical manufacturing as well. So this is where, a lot of the local, and especially if you see Mahindra also said that they would be doing the ventilator manufacturing here. Maruti got into it, but yes, auto manufacturer cannot overnight become a medical manufacturing unit. But you will see over time that over the next 3-4 years, there will be a huge shift in terms of local manufacturing. The whole Make in India was sort of in a laggard mode for the last couple of years. But I have no doubt that in the next couple of years, we will, step up to manufacturing. I think, I also want to highlight that, we move from being an agricultural economy from straight away to being an IT economy. A lot of the developed nations had a huge manufacturing setup. The British actually sort of killed our manufacturing. While the whole world had the industrial revolution going on, we missed the entire train. We became dependent on these foreign or be it British to supply for our textiles. So, this is a time that we need to build that. Being one of the biggest economies in the world, it is imperative that we do that. There's no doubt about that, Rashi.
Well, thank you, Nita. It was a great pleasure hearing you and your perspective over the supply and marketing chain. So since we are the students of AMPH, we do talk a lot about healthcare, but I think this is what we have to learn to how to manage the manufacturing or the management system. So moving on to Mr. Santosh, sir, earlier when I heard you in the start, it was a real pleasure. And it's a good learning for us AMPHs to learn how to have the correct way to deal in an organization. But moving on to the second part, do you feel that the changes that were brought are because of the reluctance and the different culture altogether, the different scenario of the country because of the COVID? So now, since we move forward, this new normal will be changing. The COVID will subside eventually, and the fear and the other reluctance of the patients and things will change. So the model implementations which were made, the organizational changes that were made, will they be continued at the same pace and with the same benefits? Or, and also, what other business models would you think Apollo will be, implementing over the years, or will other hospitals should implement, as I say?
It's a very good question, Rashi. Definitely, I think the manner in how healthcare is being provided has changed drastically. I think in the last 6 to 8 months, all of us have been on this roller coaster ride, and every day is a new learning. I think everything, and more importantly, unlearning a lot was also one of the mantra which we adopted early on in terms of this thing. I think couple of solutions over here again. I think most of the solutions which have come in COVID, based on the uniqueness of the pandemic that we are getting into, are contactless solutions. So the more and more people are looking at, they can avoid coming to the hospital, they are getting into virtual screening. The first thing what we launched was a mobile app, which gave them an ability to get into a video conferencing ability and get into telemedicine, those kind of solution. And luckily for Apollo, again, because we are far ahead of the IT curve, our EMR adoption is very strong in terms of this thing. And obviously we have, being in the leadership position that we enjoy, we have been partnering with a lot of smaller setups in tier 2, tier 3 cities, where we run what is known as eICU. We have ECGs, tele-ECGs, where we conduct ECGs and where reporting is done through a central command center. So those kind of digital pathways, definitely we have adopted in a big way, and these are here to stay. I think the more and more we are thinking about it, and I'm glad that Sandeep touched upon the issue of NCD. I think the whole focus from Apollo's point of view also is the focus of wellness rather than focusing on illness. I think that is where the overall healthcare vertical should start focusing on. And unfortunately, or fortunately for that matter, I think COVID has given us a lot of introspection, not only to the citizens. I think families have bonded together quite well during this lockdown period. I think there has been a good introspection opportunity for all families to understand the preciousness of life. You can't value the overall potential, and it also showed how vulnerable all of us are. I think earlier we thought that we will get over the COVID within 1 quarter or something like that. But I think as we see going through, I think 2021, definitely we will be not seeing individual faces for each other with the masks on still in terms of this thing. So I think there are multiple solutions that we have gone into in terms of the activity. The moment COVID hit us, what we created is cohorted areas. I think one of the element what we needed to do is to have a strict discipline between COVID and non-COVID, and more asymptomatic presentations that we are seeing of the patient population in the community. I think it is very, very important for care providers like hospitals of our repute to maintain an iron-fisted dividing line between COVID and non-COVID areas. So that is the first element what we went into, what we call it as flu clinic. So as and when we started progressing, we have successfully almost treated and cured more than almost 4,000 patients for COVID as on date in the Navi Mumbai unit. And while doing so, we also started seeing patients who were cured of COVID presenting themselves with ailments pertaining to lung, ailments pertaining to their lung diseases. So those are the elements where we started what is known as Recover Clinic. So these are new products or new service offerings which are driven by a very strong clinical pathways, which involves multidisciplinary team of the intensivists, the pulmonologists, the pediatricians, whatever we can get into. Another important element that we focused very heavily in the COVID time was pregnant ladies and geriatric patients. I think unfortunately, because these are the people, and as we have seen, onco care and pregnancies could not stop for pandemic. So definitely we needed to create a new solution, give them those kind of infection control free environment to provide continuum of care for those kind of activities. So those activities we have done. Also an interesting initiative that we have worked very closely with the government authorities. So knowing the kind of pressure on the beds, which was prevalent in the first quarter when we hit the overall COVID, Apollo launched the program which is known as Project I, which is Project Isolation. So what we did is we partnered with hotels like Yo-Yo and Ginger, where we gone into setting up a isolation center that reduced the burden on tertiary care hospital or a quaternary care hospital, and it provided a quarantine facility. And as we know, based on the socio-economic status of the people, most of the times quarantining in one bedroom hall or smaller rooms is just next to impossible. And that was our social obligation. That is where we partner with government authorities, and under our CSR funding, we did almost 50% of those beds were provided by not charging a single paisa. We also partner with them for doing free COVID testing across community. Another program which we are currently still running across with the government authorities is convalescent plasma screening. So as we all know, plasma donation has been one of the good aid in terms of treatment of COVID pathway within the hospital. And very proudly, within a short period of time, we have treated almost 250 patients under that inertia. So there are multiple avenues that we are evolving, and as we all understand, it's a moving target. The target is not condoned yet in terms of the overall activities, and it's a moving learning curve, as we all understand. But one of the activity we had to invest a lot in terms of repurposing of our staff and resources, because definitely there was a whole new set of competency which was required in terms of readiness of the overall thing. And as I informed earlier, the flexibility, faster decisions and implementing those decisions was the key. And luckily we had the infrastructure, the competency of the staff to support faster reflexes on this kind of decision-making abilities. That has helped us a lot. So definitely it's a huge learning curve for all of us, and within the Apollo ecosystem, definitely it gave us a collective effort in trying to address whatever needs to be done. And we are still very vigilant in terms of looking at the mutation of the virus, looking at the vaccination cold chain. That's a focus area, what Apollo is focusing into in terms of this thing. But digital pathway, again, coming back to your question, Rashi, is definitely here to stay. I think the whole thing, and one of the element which we are deliberating on within the Apollo ecosystem, I think the way we are looking at it, I think the whole ambulatory care services which got provided in an outpatient environment is undergoing a radical change. So while we are seeing some baby steps happening where volumes are coming back for inpatient, diagnostic, elective work, the unmet healthcare needs of the society, which was there for almost 8 to 9 months. Now, slowly people have started coming up, understanding that they cannot prolong, and that's a very unfortunate part. At times, because people are reluctant to undertake their basic vaccination, at times we are seeing people crashing into our emergency area at 2 o'clock midnight. So those kind of things, we are again reaching out. We have developed a very strong program in terms of reaching out to the community where people can't reach out to you. So you need to reach out to the community. And again, I repeat, it's a moving target and long way to go, but definitely it was quite insightful as a part of the overall journey for us.
Thank you, Mr. Santosh. Those are great insights, and I'm sure a lot of hospitals, even from small to big, has faced a lot of similar situations. But the way Apollo has shown leadership under your guidance is something quite remarkable. Now, with increased visibility of the healthcare sector's faults, or rather say shortcomings in India, there's a lot of now investors and government policies also which are looking into solving these problems. So from next year onwards, we can look into a lot more investment coming in India in the healthcare sector. So things are going to get good from here. We know that. Now, moving on to Dr. Avinash, hospitals have, as you yourself have experimented and successfully implemented a lot of digital technologies this year. Now, according to you, which aspects of these digital transformations are expected to stay for long, and what else or what new can we expect in the coming decade?
Yeah, Darshan, I think if you ask anybody, digital health is like almost a word which has become abusive. You see it everywhere. The biggest thing is when somebody tells me we are going to introduce digital health in your hospital and change the way you work and improve efficiency, change your quality and outcomes. I think that's all humbug. You cannot do that. You have to make sure you leverage digital to make the work much more effectively easy, but not talk about quality and outcomes so fast unless you understand what we're trying to do. So telehealth and telemedicine, I'm very averse on, I would say, I'm not sure how long will telemedicine survive for those companies which are tom-tomming telehealth only in COVID pandemic opportunity. How many of them are really looking at sustaining the telehealth opportunity beyond COVID? How many of them are looking at using telehealth for providing good care for chronic care practice? Acute care is completely disconnected in telehealth. In spite of all the devices and wearable and sensors you bring into this country, it is going to be very difficult for acute care, like surgical, ambulatory, spine, locomotive, all these conditions will come back post-COVID. So the telehealth company, which is tom-tomming only at COVID, is going to have a lot of difficulties. But those telehealth companies which are going to move and capitalize on the other opportunities in acute care, yes. Second, telehealth which will survive more on clinical trial opportunity, because now clinical trial also is more monitored on virtual care. The third thing is those telehealth companies which are losing out on providing good care in form of compassion and empathy also are going to lose out. So they have to bring in that aspect, because mental health also is a huge topic where people want to be engaged in conversations. So this is something I feel telehealth will have a little bit of a burnout. Now what will stay is a very rapid adoption of fintech industry penetration, insurance industry coming in very aggressively, people looking at OPD cash, co-pay, the kind of co-branding of insurance along with healthcare opportunities that will come in very strong because of the National Digital Health Mission, and already the government of India having a EHR already enabled. Hospitals will be pushed to go and adopt to local EMRs or indigenous EMR opportunities. That means we will create a larger pool of repository for a big data, which we need to basically use to manage a new sector of disease which hospitals are neglecting, population health, including people. I'm sure Sandeep has a huge workforce where he wants to monitor through an HR excellent population health about the fitness of his workforce. The third thing I feel which will continue to stay is the way we provide care. We are moving from traditional to a more innovative care with a very aware, accountable, and a questioning patient population. So we have to make sure we respect that, and that we have to kind of turn around these things. And the last point which I want to say is integrating everything in digital with the hospital is very important. You cannot have digital health only in an isolated sector. I have a question from Dr. Sudha Murthy, which I will take at the end of the session, but it's important to make sure that whatever digital adaptation you are doing in delivering healthcare is taken not just on the clinical forefront. There are a lot of other non-clinical players within digital health which can basically help the way you can drive this care. And artificial intelligence, yes, it's a reality in my hospital. We are using AI in radiology for triaging COVID patients. We are using it to monitor vitals. So it's something over the last 6 months, we have enough algorithm created using our own data with our own partner company in AI that we are able to really use this opportunity. It will continue to stay. And we are looking beyond pneumonias and tuberculosis and malignancies and X-ray and CT to kind of bring this out as a real world evidence about how we can deliver this.
Thank you, Dr. Avinash. It is always great to hear you. And what I feel, it's a great observation that you made. Where, as a clinician, I guess I think you could make that observation very well. The difference between the traditional treatment and the new innovations in healthcare, which is very important, because still I feel as a doctor myself, the acceptance of these new technologies by the physicians is really not at par the way it should be. And I see that like this is like a failure. This pandemic has taught us, showed us our failures, but I think we have even risen very very nicely from these pandemics, and it is telling us that we need to welcome more technologies in health. But how and when we do that, that is a question. How greatly we accept that in future, and how greatly it is accepted by the Indian people, is also a question, I guess. But moving on to Mr. Sandeep, sir, as you have heard from hospital point of views, all the technologies, innovations they have taken, and from hearing you earlier, I am sure you have also adopted many technologies in your organizations, like VR, AI training, and I think you are the one organization who actually touched the tier 2, tier 3 cities, which is quite commendable. So what does this what is the future of these AI and VR for your sector? And also do you think that these educational training programs you have started will be continuing in future, and they were as good as they were like the physical ones, or they were better, or they were at par?
I think that's the 1 crore rupee question, right? Because you have, like I said, there's a significant disconnect between the supply and demand. We know that, people, my parents come from a very small place in Rajasthan. I'm located in Mumbai. Every time my mother needs treatment or my family needs treatment that is intermediate to advanced, they've got to travel to New Delhi to get the care, seek appointments, or come to Mumbai to get care, right? And that disrupts the whole family ecosystem around. So patients were already wanting good quality care close to home. And that's just the reality, right? COVID has further accelerated it. Why? Because the big cities were full of COVID patients. So the care automatically, surgical care, other care shifted to tier 2. And now patients are realizing, well, I've been getting this care here, so why not continue here? With that, you will continue. But the issue is, we still have patients. I know of a patient who's taken 2 days and 10 hours of train from Manipur all the way to Chennai to get treatment for 3rd stage cancer. You're doubling the cost of care, you're putting burden on your family, and it's not efficient, right? So why? Because the multidisciplinary care still does not exist within Northeast, and that's a cancer capital of India. The patients don't have confidence. It's not that they don't have cancer centers in Northeast, but there's lack of patient confidence. There's lack of that multidisciplinary care that should exist there. So I think the demand in tier 2 will increase. The demand in tier 3 will increase. Hospitals, Apollo, Mr. Santosh here can attest to it. They're expanding into tier 2 cities. Lucknow is a recent example. You're expanding into these cities. The issue is, Rashi, how do you improve the quality of care so that my mother who lives in a small town in Alwar, Rajasthan can get the same level of care that Apollo Chennai can deliver or that Ruby Hall can deliver? And that is the golden question. And so for us, they're fundamentally, we are short. During COVID, it was very clear. We were short 10 million doctors or 10 lakh doctors, right? I'm saying 10 million, 10 lakh doctors, 20 lakh nurses. It's only going to compound. As you see, right? If your insurance is going to increase, affordability is going to increase, whether it's private, whether it's government, there'll be more demand on care. As the trend towards wellness increases, there'll be more demand of care. Medical colleges, 541 medical colleges, half of them don't have a skill lab, Rashi. So how are you going to train people that are going to graduate? 90% of the nurses that are graduating today haven't touched a patient. How are you going to entrust your care with these people, right? So I think it's a mission, and it will take an ecosystem. It will take an ecosystem of providers. It will take an ecosystem with the government. It will take ecosystem with the industry, with the non-profits, everyone coming together, leveraging our CSR funds. I think money is tight on everyone, but CSR funds, leverage your CSR funds and develop that ecosystem. For a surgeon that can take 30 years to train or 20 years to train, can you use the AI that Avinash is talking about? Shorten that learning curve. Put in measurable outcomes. Use AI to even self-score, because you cannot have enough trainers or evaluators. Can you use AI that gives you a self-score to say, is your catheterization skill okay? Is your anastomosis skill okay? So I think this trend is here to stay. I think this trend is here it'll accelerate even more so. And I'm very confident that we will be able to bridge the care between a metro city, the patient receiving care for intermediate and advanced care in a metro city, versus a patient who gets care in a tier 2 city. And I think even telementoring kind of capabilities, where someone from Santosh, your clinic in Hyderabad, your hospital in Hyderabad, can give guidance to an emerging surgeon in Alwar, Rajasthan, live during surgery using telementoring, and say, that's exactly where you throw a suture. That's exactly where you throw that cut. So it's very exciting for me. I think the future is very exciting.
Thank you, sir. That was very nice observations again, as I must add to it. So one question, I'm into research. So till now, I don't think J&J has invested much in India in terms of research work. Why do you think was the reason behind it? Was it the ability, or was it the quality, or was it lack of demand or trust in Indian system?
Well, I'll say, Rashi, we've been in India since independence.
Yeah.
So I'll just say that, right? So we've been in India since independence, and we have, for us, we've been pioneers in terms of training surgeons, establishing a standard of care, working with hospitals, actually Apollo is our biggest customer. We've trained close to 3 lakh surgeons in India since our start, right? Ushering in surgical approaches, safe and effective use of devices. Now, in terms of manufacturing and make in India, and bringing in research capabilities, bringing in development capabilities, and the fact of the matter is that 86% of the medical devices, Rashi, within India are still imported, and I completely agree with Neeta. We need to change that, right? How do you make India, when you say Atmanirbhar, not just to be able to provide the medical devices, a high quality, high-tech medical device to our patients imported, but also how can we leverage the manufacturing capabilities here, which are, by the way, very nascent, very, very nascent. How do you crop up an ecosystem of manufacturing in India so you're not only self-reliant for your own needs, which are fast emerging, and oh, by the way, 15% or so, or some in hospitals, 18%, 20% or so of your patient load is medical tourism. So the signal of quality, the signal of it's made here with pride, right? So we have a manufacturing, I'll make it real for you. We have manufacturing plants in India. We have consumer business, as you know, in J&J, we have a consumer business. We make sanitary napkins. We have a whole host of consumer products that we make here. Most of the consumer products that we sell in India are made in India. Then we have a pharmaceutical business, which we have R&D in India, global R&D in India, not just for India. And then for medical device, we have our sutures, which are, extensive market share, which are also made in India. So we have plants in India. But I will say this, Rashi, and we have an ecosystem. It's not all J&J plants. We have an ecosystem of MSMEs. In fact, 19 of our plants in India are local plants that we provided R&D capabilities to, that they now manufacture for us, right? So it's an ecosystem partnership. But I think for us to be able to bring more, and this goes for all multinationals, for multinationals to invest more in India, what will it take to create an ecosystem of partnerships? The number one is the signal of quality. Quality-based suppliers. How do you prop up an ecosystem of quality-based suppliers? How do you signal standards that are harmonized with global standards? And Rashi, right now, the standards are not fully harmonized with global standards. So, and for medical devices that are very, very regulated, how do you create an ecosystem of globally harmonized standards, create incentives, which I think the Department of Pharmaceuticals is doing a great job now. They've launched the PLI scheme, Production Linked Incentive Scheme. I think it's a start. I think it's a start. It needs to evolve. I think it's a good start to give impetus to manufacturing in India. So I think for us, Rashi, we would want nothing more. To bring in more R&D, to bring in more capabilities, to invest here so that this becomes a hub to export more. We have a foot in the door. We would love to do more, with a partnership with the ecosystem. But I think so much has to be true. We have the skilled labor. We need quality indicators. We need good regulation in India. We need IP protection in India, right? That has to be true as well. And of course, everyone needs responsible pricing. I think we all have to be accountable for responsible pricing as well.
Of course, sir. Thank you so much for your question. I hope we in the future will bring those differences for you now. Over to Darshan, please.
Thank you. Johnson's doing fantastic work, and we look forward to the future that brings.
Can I just chime in and add on to Sandeep's point as well? So I used to work with Medtronic, and then there was the same issue 3 to 4 years back. And I did handle a lot of the products for the emerging economy. So, localizing the products from the developed economy to the emerging economy. But there was a trickle effect. Now you hear, 3 years, 4 years down the line, there's 1,200 crores investment of Medtronic in core R&D potentially manufacturing. Philips has moved their MR systems manufacturing to India, or at least parts of it, the sub-assemblies, right? So I'm hopeful that over time, we would see some trickle effect. I'm optimistic, but you're right, absolutely. We do need those laws in place, the IP protection. I think Novartis did try, at least going back to some of the pharmaceutical as well, or the drug development. But I think we do need some localized, players as well to make it big. We hear about Lotus Lab getting into biotech, or Biocons of the world. I think some of them did get into drug discovery, but nonetheless, I think we do have biosimilars or the vaccine providers who've really gone big. We had Suchitra Ella talk about it. So there is potential, definitely. We need some of the, not just the bigger players who became big over the last decade, but the timelines are about a decade for getting, from baby steps to right there. And then this is, I think, the time also for MNCs to change their strategy and look at
Absolutely.
India as a big marketplace.
Absolutely. And I think, Neeta, it's not just about manufacturing in India, where you have to have a MNC set up a plant in India, right? Which is good because it creates a whole ecosystem of quality suppliers, other MSMEs. Like I said, for us, we have few plants, but we have a triple the size of an ecosystem of local manufacturers that manufacture for us, right? Based on our R&D and specifications. And even for the vaccine that J&J is developing, the vaccine, the manufacturing, one of the big manufacturers for us globally is BioE in Hyderabad. So we are partnering with BioE in Hyderabad, where we are transferring our technology to BioE to leverage BioE's capability to manufacture, right? So it's not that J&J is now going to set up a separate vaccine plant in India. We're going to leverage world-class capabilities that exist in India. And we're going to boost those capabilities. We're doing a tech transfer, and so that we can supply products to India and to the world, right? So I think you have to look at different dimensions of, that's why I keep saying, it's not MNC versus local. It's not a competition, MNC versus local. Everyone is bringing their strengths. The reason China has become a powerhouse today is because it welcomed that ecosystem. It created that ecosystem where you bring in expertise, R&D capabilities, process capabilities, created that system where their own companies started to grow and get stronger. Their supplier bases began to grow, become stronger. And today they have become net exporters to the world, right? So I just want to, emphasize that point. And as far as I think the companies are very excited to be here, but it's a long-term, because we all see such a long-term potential in India.
Thank you. So, Ms. Neeta, you already answered the question I was going to ask. Yes. There may be many attendees who are into the indigenous manufacturing background, and a lot of from the industry as well. Now, looking at the future of healthcare in India, there is going to be a lot of investments. So any guidance on how to start, or there are, of course, some questions regarding that some people may have the expertise, but how to start the process and how to look for investors?
Is that a question for me, Darshan?
Yes.
Yeah, I think there was a very provocative statement made by a very big, entrepreneur just a couple of days back, that, a lot of the investments are coming in from outside of India, and the IP which is created here, you're sort of taking it out of India. So, do we need, and I'm not going to make any more provocative statement, but just leave it as that. Of course, there's a lot of know-how coming in from outside and from India, and trying to go global. So we have Y Combinators of the world, which is doing amazing job with the Indian entrepreneurs, handholding them, taking them to the Silicon Valley, or investors from other countries as well, doing great job of helping some of the local firms grow big. I mean, we have unicorns. We have one of the biggest number of unicorns, next to China, and then potential to grow bigger. So how can we grow some of these, some of the local players, at least in the healthcare space? I would love to see unicorns in the healthcare space. That is where investors like India would step in, because, my colleague, Dr. Ramesh, he's a cardiologist. We do need to see a lot of investors from core more technical background, a lot more, entrepreneurs who are, let's say physicians or scientists becoming investors who understand the technology and handhold some of the startups to grow bigger, because the traditional investors don't come from domain background, so they don't know what they are putting in money, and so they've gone less risk averse and gone into more services business. So I think investors who come with strong technical domain knowledge can help some of the startups in the healthcare field grow bigger, and that's where a lot more healthcare people need to get it onto the investor side, and then I would like to leave it as that. So a lot of you who are getting MBAs and have either are in drug development or physicians, I think here's an opportunity to really work, be entrepreneurs, as well as get on the investment side of things as well.
Thank you very much for beautiful insights. Now we will quickly take some questions from the attendees. The first question is addressed to Dr. Avinash. How easy or difficult is it to adopt digitalization in all aspects mentioned in partially established digital ecosystem of a healthcare organization, which needs to be upgraded to make it interoperable or to avoid a digital silos in HCO?
Yeah, so this question came from Dr. Sudha. So I just wanted to tell her that the most important thing about adopting digital is they should not be pushed from the digital side. The pull should be from the clinical side or from the workforce side. You need to make sure there are, I would say, the software evaluation is done from day one when you buy something. If you're buying a monitor from J&J or if you're buying a ventilator from Drager, these systems have to be open. They have to be HL7. That's the first basic rule. Your data entry of any patient cannot be duplicated. It has to be simple. It cannot be garbage in, garbage out. You need to make sure your data entry is done well. You need to avoid duplication of all your data. And most important, digital is never clinical. It is also a lot of areas which could be right from laundry to RFID tracking of a biomedical asset. It could be something like simple, your F&B and your diet management can be digital. So digital can be broken up into opportunities of blockchain, opportunities of AI, machine learning, opportunities of automation, opportunities of robotics. So please make sure that you don't tom-tom the digital journey or adoption only in the clinical space, where you will feel there are a lot of human elements which will be the barriers. Look at the other opportunity. And the last point is, it will always, the fruits which you will bear out of digital adoption may not be always visible in front in form of UI UX of the patient, but it will be definitely seen on the balance sheet.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this question is for Mr. Santosh Marathe. So Apollo has always been very active in their marketing terms, and they have been able to pull up patients from tier 2, tier 3 cities to their central centers. So, looking forward in the future, what do you think will be the status for medical tourism in India? Because which is also one of the growing aspect of other healthcare, which is growing day by day. And Apollo and also Ruby is doing quite well in that. So would you please share some insights on that?
I think medical tourism is a very loosely used word in whatever context. I think either people don't do justice either to the tourism part or either to the medical part. Because getting, I think, both the partners together is a Herculean task. But having said that, definitely one of the things which I can say with pride, I think definitely the kind of world-class facility that most of the private hospitals in India offer, I think it's something to be proud about. When you get into a JCI league where people choose a Joint Commission International Hospital and come to a repute, where we can offer the best of the medical services, best of the a la carte menu, best of the concierge service that we can do, and yes, throw in some medical tourism bit of it. I think definitely that's there. One of the things what needs to change from an Indian healthcare point of view is, I think in most of the Western countries, there is a certification of need before you open up a hospital. Unfortunately, in the Indian context, you just need a shop license act to open up a hospital. And next day you are a hospital owner without understanding a head to toe of what it takes into healthcare. So there is a lot of participative care opportunity, which is available with tier 2, tier 3 cities, as you rightly said, Rashi. There are multiple avenues where private hospitals can partner with government authorities rather than replicating resources. I think if we could work together, create those kind of center of excellence. And as we all understand, healthcare is all becoming a local play now. So unless and until you reach out to larger community, one of the things which we very proudly run is our pediatric cardiology program. So in pediatric cardiology program, I reach out to tier 2, tier 3 cities where we do the screening and offer fully subsidized pediatric cardiac cases to one of the best facility in town. And this is the kind of reach element what we provide. And on the other side of the pendulum, I also run a very successful program of pediatric cardiology with Ministry of Health Iraq, where my team flies from here, does pediatric cases over there, and gets those complicated cases in Mumbai. So that's the kind of balancing, and that's the cross subsidization element. If we could manage this whole economics of it, and while doing so, one of the obligation what we think is not only to treat and enhance the quality of care, but also to enhance the quality of care in the community. So we partner with multiple nursing homes. We adopt those nursing homes. I provide observership programs to their nursing, to their technicians, to their intensivists. They come over, have an observership program which is offered free of cost. And this is what we engage with them in building capacity of the healthcare providers in terms of this thing. The EICU that I talked about, the command center, which I am hosting in the hospital, I can reach out to any of the smaller setups of ICU and provide those kind of qualitative aspect of care. So definitely, I think some push from the government authorities will be helpful in getting into this kind of cohesive growth where we elevate the overall standard of care across. And then unfortunately, as Sandeep also gave a couple of examples, the reach element to the remotest of the remote area, including medical tourism also that happens. Unfortunately, we end up paying a lot of hassles for non-medical part of that health journey. It is the travel, it is the stay, it is the family which gets compromised, it is the lifestyle compromisation. And that's the same thing with most of the medical tourism. The intent what we hear from most of the countries nowadays is that they would like to localize the spend rather than people flying out of the country, because they spend almost significant amount of time on non-healthcare travel plan. Attenders need to come, they have their own allowances, they have their own cooking rituals and all those kind of activities. So definitely there is a big opportunity in terms of getting it right within the community.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Next question, maybe Ms. Neeta, you can answer this. Why Indian manufactured medical devices are considered as low quality compared to imported device? Is this a reality or myth for the foreign companies to charge more to the patients?
So I'll give you an example of the Arvind Eye Care. They came out with a lens. They have a eye lens manufacturing unit, and I think competing with the J&J product. So AuroLens, at least in their trials, they've shown that it's as good as the gold standard, if not better. And the price was, I think 100 rupees a lens for the cataract, implant lenses. But I think the perception of, like what you just said, it's a perception matter. And then there's surgeon in the medical, which makes these stents. So they have to go outside India. And I think I was listening to the Thai panels just this morning. You have to go outside of India to do some of these clinical trials to prove that your quality is as good as, if not better, to compare to some of the MNCs. So it's getting there. I'm not saying that everything is good quality, but in order to prove, you will have to do these clinical trial studies, compare it to some of the MNC gold standard diagnostics or devices, and then prove it, right? It's not just, we will take it at face value. I mean, I think none of us, you included or anyone, will take any implants which are anything less than first rate. So there's a lot needs to be proven, but I think there's a lot of scope as well.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for panel discussion and Q&As today. We will try to, any questions which are left, we will try to answer them at a later time via email. We'll get in touch with you. But it was great having conversation with Mr. Santosh Marathe, Sandeep Makkar, Neeta Sachin, and Avinash Nanivaidkar. Thank you so much for giving your time to us. And over to Rakesh for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Darshan. It was a wonderful discussion, and I wish it goes on and on, But yeah, we have a limitation of time, so it has to end at 7:30. Yeah, so I think if you just take the key takeaways, and I agree with most of the points which Mr. Marathe made, and because he is pretty much experienced and he has shared the real-time experience of running a huge reputed hospital. So yeah, we all agree that we have grappled with this virus and didn't know how to manage it. But I think the initiatives that were taken by the hospital were really very value adding, and that resulted in controlling the pandemic in India. And we can judge with the numbers that we have displayed to the world, right? Secondly, the Red Book initiative of Apollo is highly appreciated. And I'm sure other healthcare service providers would learn from that initiative. And Mr. Nani Vedkar, I think you are very much technically oriented, and the value that you have added to your hospital is really worth appreciating and worth replicating elsewhere. So thank you so much for all the initiatives that you've taken. I think telehealth, you may not agree, but yeah, that's coming up in a big way across the country. But yes, I agree with you that it has to evolve into a more value-adding service than just having a video call between the doctors and the patients. Ms. Neeta, I think you have also made very value-adding suggestions to the ecosystem, how it should evolve. Definitely, we should have startups coming up, participate in the journey that India is making, and maybe make India a powerhouse in future. And Sameer ji, I think your points are very well appreciated. The kind of work J&J is doing in India is massive, and definitely we see a lot of value from that. And lastly, on medical tourism, the point is that it should not confuse between medical and tourism, but it should evolve into a more value-adding service for the people visiting India and should give a better experience. So that's all from me. I think this is time to end the discussion, and let's move on to the panel 3. So thank you very much, all the panelists, and we look forward to learning from you in future as well. So I hand over the session to Ms. Sushmita. She will handle the session 3. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.